Hey everyone, and welcome back to Build UX. In this episode, we're going to continue working on the design stage of our project, focusing on getting the overall layout of our app established, as well as getting the overall component styling in place. With where we left off in the last episode, we got all of our colors sampled that we found in this design, as well as established our unique type specs that we found as we went through and matched the typography. And as we mentioned last time, there's probably way too much variation in the color and type styles, so we'll definitely want to narrow things down as we start refining this design. For now though, one thing I'm realizing is we originally color sampled all of our unique colors and named them simply by kind of their color family as well as their lightness value. But as we think ahead to the theming of our app, keep in mind we'll want to do both a light and dark theme for this UI. We'll probably want to focus on naming colors more by their utility instead of their semantic purpose or maybe just their color name. And so while this seems like it might result in some duplication, for example, one of the secondary grays might be used for multiple purposes, this might be the best approach for handling the theming since we might have to point these to different hex values in the future once we toggle between the light and dark themes. So with that said, let's focus on getting the overall background color of the app established and then start focusing on these component layouts. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit R for the rectangle tool. Let's drag out a rectangle that matches our artboard size. And we'll want to send this beneath all of our typography. And let's give this a name of background plate. I'm going to remove the fill just temporarily. And that way, what we can do is, if we toggle the visibility off on this layer, color sample the main background of our app UI. So we'll give that a color sample, toggle this back on, and now you can see that this would act as the overall background of our app. For now, we're going to keep it turned off so we can keep working on the layers above this. So from here, with that main color established, let's focus on the actual dimensions of this sidebar. And if we look closely here, it seems like it would extend all the way to this edge of the header as well as the inbox list. But we notice that there is a small gap between these sections if we look at this closely. So grabbing the rectangle tool, let's just measure this out and see what dimension this gap seems to be. It looks like this is a 4-pixel gap all around. So what I think we'll do is grab this as kind of a spacer. Let's just rotate it around real quick. And this is just a temporary spacer. I'm going to send this up to an X of 0 and make sure that the height, in this case, since we rotated it, it's going to be the width. Let's set this to be 1600. And actually that should have been the Y of 0. So let's get things adjusted here. Back it up a bit. And so our width, it's going to be 1600, and this will just act as a temporary spacer so we can observe what dimension this sidebar should be. So let's open up our sidebar layers and hit R for rectangle tool. Let's drag this out to the desired dimensions here. And we'll want to, again, grab that same background color that we saw before. I think I'm going to stick with just sampling colors for now, because we ended up with so many unique color variables that it's difficult to tell which is used where. It looks like our dimensions are a little bit off here, so let's make sure we match that edge to retain the 4-pixel gap. And let's rename this to sidebar, and this will be the sidebar plate. We can drag this in our layers to go beneath the typography of the sidebar, and we can get rid of this temporary spacer. Okay, so you'll notice that now all we're doing is starting to obscure the reference file beneath, which is fine for now. We'll keep referencing that as we start moving our way through the visual layers of our design to bring more and more fidelity to our recreation of the design. Next, let's move into the header and get that layout established. So rectangle tool yet again. Let's drag this out. What I'm going to do is, using the width and height tools in Figma, just adjust things until we see that gap being revealed. So let's first make sure the height looks how we'd expect it. It looks like we are 2 pixels too short. So let's get that to 104. And then let's check our width using the beneath section as a visual guide. I know this is quite low contrast, and so it's kind of difficult to see here, but let's just do our best to align things to that pixel grid. So we'll color sample the background of the inbox, which is the same as the header. Let's drag this into the header group, and this will be the header plate. That's established. And so now what you see as we look at these designs is you're starting to see the actual dimensions of these components, which is super handy. Next, let's turn our attention to this inbox section. So grab rectangle tool and try to drag out from this correct pixel here. We're going to have to zoom out and pan quite a bit to get to the bottom of our design. And so let's zoom in and try to match that 4 pixel gap. That looks correct to me. So color sample here. Send this to the bottom of our inbox group. This will be our inbox plate. And lastly, let's do the same for this message detail section. So dragging our rectangle down all the way to the corner of our artboard. Let's get the background color in place. Send it to the bottom of our message detail section. Let's call this message detail plate. Okay, lastly, I think we're going to drag our reply to sit on top, just in terms of the stacking context, to sit on top of the inbox and message detail sections. We're going to turn these off temporarily so we can see what's going on. And this reply pop out basically is one of the first more granular components that we'll start establishing the styling of. And you can see that we also have some styling to establish for the active message in our inbox, the notification, the add new email button, and some of the tooltip elements as well. So we can get more granular as we go here, establishing the overall layout and styling of this app. So here I'm going to have to basically zoom way in and take a look at what dimension we're working with here. Looks like we matched the top edge. Let's try to find, maybe going off of corners will be a little more efficient here. So we have the right width established here, and that looks like the right dimension on that side. So all we need to check is the top right corner actually. Zooming way in here, just to make sure we match everything as we found it originally. And the next thing I'm going to do is adjust the corner radius until we hit on the styling of what we see in our reference here. So let's increase this corner radius until we see the design beneath peeking through. Now there's a little bit of pixelation going on here from the reference design because we're zoomed so far in, but it looks like 20 pixels is what we're finding here. And what I'm going to do is just temporarily nudge this by 10 pixels, holding shift and the down arrow. And that'll allow us to color sample this background color. And so we'll notice that this is actually a gradient fill. So we're going to use a linear gradient. Let's color sample this first stop here in the top left corner. And I believe this will be an angled gradient. So something along a 45, I'm guessing. I'm going to move the stops just to follow the overall dimension of this as a first pass. Now what we'll have to do is actually shift this up 20 pixels so we can go back into our gradient, grab the end stop, and let's color sample the very bottom right corner of this. And so this hopefully should be a pretty subtle change along this component. If we shift it down 10 pixels, now we're aligning perfectly. And we can go into our reply layer group, drag this in. This will be the reply plate. Should have that subtle gradient applied. Let's go ahead and toggle this off temporarily to allow us to focus on this text area for actually typing out the message. And it'll be a similar process here. So rectangle tool, drag things out. Let's match our corners and the design with what we see here. That top right looks correct. Let's go down to the bottom left. Quickly getting things adjusted as needed. And that looks like the correct dimension on that front. I'm going to shift this down just a little bit here so we can sample the background color. Actually, before that, it'd probably be helpful to get the border radius matched while it's easy to see what's going on. So let's increase this border radius until we see the design coming from beneath. Looks like, again, this is 20 pixels, which is good. We're starting to see basically that we have a little bit more of a design system approach to things like border radii coming into place, which will make things easier to implement, a little more maintainable, easier to keep track of. So let's sample this background color, shift it up to match the design, and we'll call this the reply body, and this will be the plate. I'm going to drag it to just come directly underneath our canned responses and placeholder typography, since these need to sit on top, but are basically part of this same subcomponent. And let's get our background plate re-enabled there. Okay, now if we zoom out, we can turn on the rest of our layers we just created here. And we can see the overall shape of the app starting to come into form. One thing I'm noticing looking at this reply, if we turn off some of these other layers and kind of go between them, is it looks like there might be a gradient in the reply body as well. So let's turn on this layer group one more time and grab the reply body plate. I'm going to turn off the background beneath that. And we'll follow a similar process to what we did with getting the gradient established on this overall component. So I'm going to nudge this down and change this fill from solid to linear. Let's get the gradient stops going generally in the direction of this component. We'll have to play around with the overall gradient direction a bit here, but for now let's just get things established overall. Looks like the top left of our gradient start is already sampled correctly. We need to work on getting the end stop sampled as well. Okay, so we grab that. And again, it's a very subtle shift, it looks like, in the gradation of this color. You can see that it just barely darkens as the gradient progresses. And so now we can put this back into place. And now things should match more closely. Great, so things are looking good there. Let's reveal some of the underlying design real quick, just so we can see what other components need to be established. Let's focus our attention on this background treatment for the active or opened email. So this will be in our inbox layer, and we can turn off the bottom plate for now. Let's drag out the rectangle as needed. Okay, and get our bottom left corner established. All right, that dimension looks correct. While we're here, let's dial in the border radius. Hopefully it matches other values that we've seen so far. Looks like this is a much more significant border radius. So we're starting to see maybe a second style of rounded corner to establish a little bit of hierarchy here. It looks like this is somewhere in between 32 and 36 pixels. Maybe, yep, 32 looks a little bit better to my eye to closer match what we see here. So we can nudge this down. This is also going to have a gradient fill on it. So we'll color sample the top left. Get our gradient stop dragged out. I think for simplicity, probably have to go corner to corner for now, but we may want to introduce more consistency for the overall gradient direction once we get into things. So I'm going to nudge this up grab the end stop of the gradient, sample this bottom corner. That's looking pretty good. Get it aligning with the design. Let's drag this underneath. This will be our second message. So maybe here we can name it to indicate that this is the active message. And let's drag this down. On message, active plate. Looking good. While we're working on the inbox section, let's get the rest of the shapes that we see here established. So we can do the notification bubble, the add email, avatar, this notification dot, and these pills that go around the timestamps. So first off, let's turn this off so we can see the avatar beneath it. And let's just work off this one. It's easier to see in terms of contrast. So let's dial in the dimension that we're finding here. 48 by 48, which is great for a tap target size. Let's dial in the border radius here. And it looks like it's not quite circular. You can see here we're somewhere between 20, probably around 20 pixels in terms of border radius. So here I'm also going to add a stroke for the border. Let's set this to be an outside stroke. And it looks like this is probably 2 pixels thick. I'm going to leave this fill just a generic gray for now. And let's call this the avatar plate. Awesome. So this will go into each of the messages that we find. So we'll drag that into place here. Let's bring this up to the previous message. Drop it in accordingly. Make sure it aligns with the design beneath it. That looks good. And here we're going to turn it off temporarily just to add this notification bubble on top. So it looks like it's a 14 by 14. I'm guessing this is probably going to have a pretty rounded radius. It looks like it's just shy of 50%. Keeping with this kind of rounded ellipse look that we have in the app. So we can nudge this down and get this gradient established. So it'll be a linear gradient, and that'll be at a 45 with this component. Let's grab the start color, top left, and the stop color at the end. Just a very subtle gradient. We also have this blue box shadow that's beneath it. So we'll add the effect of a box shadow. And we can color sample from here. We may have to adjust the opacity accordingly. It looks like this is probably going to go to the bottom right just a tad bit. Maybe not so much on the X. We'll have to finesse this a little bit. Blur, we definitely want to be higher up, but it looks like our spread values are probably too large. And let's nudge this opacity down just a little bit to make it more subtle. Something like this looks correct, but we can always come back and finesse this further. So let's say this is the avatar notification dot, which will be optional as we start to componentize things. And we can turn on our mockup of the avatar itself. Okay, so we got that established. Let's quickly drag out instances of the avatar into each message. And that takes care of our avatars. Let's get the notification dot established in our inbox with the unread number up here. So quickly dragging out the dimensions. getting the border radius established. A little bit more of a pill shape here. Gonna drag this down again to get the gradient going. So linear. Drag this start and stop points out. Let's color sample what we find here. All right, that's looking good. We back it up. And we'll put this underneath our unread number. So let's say unread, this will be the plate. And then let's make this sort of a subcomponent of this unread group. Looking good. Let's do the same for this add button. Looks like this is probably 36 by 36 square. Yep, get our border radius going. All right, that's looking good. And for now, we'll leave it at that. We'll come back and do all of the icons in our app at the same time, since that'll be a lot of pen tool and vector work. But we're just going to establish these plates just to get an idea of the overall dimension of things and start establishing style for border radii, things along those lines. So this will be our add button. This will be the plate for that. We'll add the rest of it in the future here. Let's get the pill for the timestamp going. Zooming in yet again. This looks like it's probably fully rounded. Yep, looks like if we go to a border radius of 10, we have that established as needed. Let's grab the background color. No gradient on this one. Get that in place. This will be the timestamp plate. We'll want to open up a message and group it with the timestamp typography. So we'll say that this is timestamp. As part of the message component that we'll build. I'm going to copy this down and we'll replicate it for each of the messages. Now this reply section is obscuring the content beneath it, so we can turn off our reference design temporarily and bring in our background plate. And really this would have typography extending the full extent of this. Originally, we just matched exactly what we found in the design, but really this body of each message would go full length. We'll address that in the future here as we finalize and refine things. So in this message, let's paste in our timestamp. This will go beneath the typography and be centered accordingly. Okay, so taking a look at things, we're getting pretty close here. Looks like we need to turn our attention to the message detail section, get anything else established there in terms of overall layout and sizing. All right, so taking a look at things with all of our new layers turned on, looks like we're making some good progress. I think we're going to stop here for this episode. In the next episode, we'll definitely want to address the remaining design found in the message detail pane for the avatars and tooltips and the attachment bubbles as well. And from there, we can start diving into recreating icons using the pen tool in Figma. And once we have a good replica of the reference design, we can really turn our attention to componentizing everything. We can start refining things for accessibility and more consistency. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out the next episode, and we'll continue working in Figma to build out this design.